Hi guys, welcome to my latest tutorial. For this video I'm going to actually walk through my latest Esprit render. So the image you're looking at now, that's like the final image that I created. I'm just going to go through all the layers and explain how I actually got to that point. So basically our first thing, what I do is actually I'll take my hand-drawn sketch, scan it in. So yeah, there's the hand-drawn sketch. I actually took the design from one of my previous YouTube videos and I just fixed it up and cleaned up a couple lines. And then from scanning it in, what I do is I actually take the sketch and click multiply, and then put it right at the top. So when you click multiply and you work layers underneath it, you can actually see your outline over everything you're working on. So scan it in, drop it in Photoshop, click multiply, and drop my opacity all the way down, just so that it's not so bold that you can't see what you're doing in Photoshop. And then from the get-go I worked in a dark grey background. I knew I wanted a dark background to begin with. And then I made a vector mask and I went around all the little edges of my sketch, kind of cleaning up as I go, just so you can get the overall body of the car, not worried too much about the details just yet. And you can see I've got a crazy amount of layers. Like, you don't need this many layers, it just helps. It's the way I do things, and it helps me do a lot of fine tuning, and it also helps show every little step of the process, but it doesn't have to be this many layers at all. You can work on a couple layers and group everything. And then from there I start blocking out all the main elements of the car. So layer 5 here, that's side window, back window. And I don't name my layers, I'm just going by numerical order and seeing how that goes. And then every area that I block out, I create a vector mask, just so that it helps me come back and reselect it when I want to. So for instance, this area here, actually I'll come back to that later, that's actually quite a late layer. Just something like this little area in the diffuser, because it's a vector mask, make selection. I can always come back to that. I can always make a selection without having to reselect it every time I want to work on that area. So all the main areas I use vector masks, but then it gets to the point where you're just reworking those areas. You don't have to make a vector mask every single time. And with the amount of layers I have, it can get confusing. So what I do is I use the little select tool at the top, and I make sure that it's on layer. So if I ever need to find a layer, I can click on it and it'll take me straight to that, provided that my sketch is not on. Because if the sketch is on and it's on top of all the other layers, it's just going to take me straight to the sketch layer. But yeah, if you do get lost, it really helps track down where your layers are. I use it all the time. So this is just for solid color blocking out and creating vector masks of all the main areas. And also cleaning up the lines of the sketch as I'm going. And then slowly start shading the body of the car, which I'll explain now. Okay, so with the way I started out my shading, what I did is I assumed that light was coming from the top, but also to the side. So something like this. So it would be darker going downwards, and light going upwards. But also being from the side, areas like that will be lighter, and then areas that you feel slope downwards will be darker. And you'll see how that evolves. And all of this, just drop that down a bit. And all of my first kind of attempts of shading were all as if the car was matte, just soft shading, not worrying about any reflections, just getting a feel for the form of the car. So no like hard edges, all just soft reflections. Not soft shading. Using the vector masked areas and just using a big soft brush and blending tones. So all the higher up areas in the car use lighter yellow tones, and all the darker lower down areas in the car, or parts that face downwards, they tend to have the darker, almost orange areas, or orange shading. So when you take the sketch away, you can still see it looks really basic, so you still need that sketch to guide you. And then just dealing with the wheel wells themselves, I use an ellipse tool just to make sure that it's a perfect ellipse. You're not trying to do it by eye or with a pencil or anything. I think it's really important to get that neat and to get that looking right. And just adding the shadow. The second you add the shadow in the back wheel, it helps place the car on its environment. And still adding just your soft shading. So even in the window area there, instead of one flat grey block, adding shading to the window as well. Come back to that highlight now. And then slowly working off, assuming that there's light coming up from the horizon, slowly start building up hard, more crisp reflections as well, within those vector masked areas that I've created, and then shading in the diffuse area as well. I imported a little, copied a little mesh texture of Lotus Esprit, just so that, I mean, it's a tiny detail, but just to help tie in the Lotus look. and then adding depth into the light housing or light cluster area before I've even actually added the tail lights themselves. And that's one of the key reflections that I've worked with. And I'll speak more about those reflections now. So once I start creating an environment around the car. And then with this layer here, it's got like a reddish look to it, so that's assuming that the tail lights are going to reflect up onto this panel and give the car a bit more of a realistic look. You can see as the layers evolve, creating more depth. So starting out, I don't use any extreme highlights or any extreme dark tones, and then as it evolves, I add more and more. I rework those same areas and I try to create more and more depth, just to give the car a really 3D feel. So you often find that all these little panels that I'm shading up now, I'll go over them a couple times until they look the way I want to. And now slowly building up those harder, more crisp reflections to help make the car look reflective. And that's also used with pencils, so you select an area within those vector masks and you make sure that you got a really crisp edge. I don't like using a hard brush, trying to create those crisp reflections. The pencil is much more forgiving. And with the back window, I just made a one solid black panel, and then added a reflection on top of that. And then connecting the these little fins above the tail lights, I just used made it look like a little bit of a brake light. Where the original Esprit actually had a brake light embedded into the spoiler, this is kind of like my modern interpretation of that. This is the shading actually beneath the tail lights, so giving that red glow. And I'm going to take off the sketch layer now. Probably take off the arrows as well. So now that you've taken off the sketch layer, you can see the volume of the car starting to build up. It's not quite where I finished off, but it's getting there. And when it comes to details, I group my details separately. So I have one massive group for all my bodywork, and then when I focus on tail lights, I group them separately. So I use the ellipse tool just to make sure that the tail lights were so perfectly round like the wheel wells, and then just kept selecting those little areas, builds up shines and reflections, and then did a shine over the whole glass housing, and then kind of took those ellipse tools, copied them over, did the same for the other side, and just adding shine and matching the shines of the lighting of the tail lights to the bodywork, so it doesn't look like it's out of place. Even with the exhaust as well. So ellipse tools, just building in this mapping in that same lighting, just so it all looks like it's one environment. Back to that one. And then with the wheels themselves, I actually because there's so much detail within the wheels, I took the wheels off a BMW M8 GTE that looked like modern versions of the Esprit wheels, and then just kind of added extra lighting to make it match the car. So I didn't actually render up the wheels from scratch. I like tweaking them, but it takes a ton of time to create the wheels from scratch if you're so worried about time. So this first layer, kind of soft brush in the background, gives the environment a lighter feel. This was another soft brush layer, kind of working with like a light horizon line. There's a darker layer. So I had a ton of layers just trying to create the right depth for the background. Added a little bit of a red glow behind. It's a little bit out of order, but just trying to give the environment a lot of depth. And then what I actually did is I felt that the car still looked a bit flat, so I added another light source on the floor, as if the car is going to reflect off its little light strip off the floor. So that's the light strip there, and then I added a ton of reflections just to make the car look even shinier. Same story with the wheels and tires. I took tires of an existing car and just found the right angle and then kind of shading it into the wheel well, you'll see here. So this was the exact tire as it was copied off, and then I just added a layer on top of that just to shade it in and look like it's actually fitting into that wheel well. And because the front and back tires are similar angles, I actually even used the same tire and just actually warped it a little bit. So it's just one tire that actually fit all three wheels. So now with adding this light source at the bottom, I'm adding additional reflections. So assuming that there's this panel here, it's going to have a reflection onto the floor. Added a soft yellow, just like using a soft yellow brush underneath, and then actually using a bit of a noise filter, a dissolve filter, over that same soft yellow layer, just duplicated it, and then creating a hard crisp reflection on top of that. Something like that. And then you'll find that I do that same process throughout all the extra reflections I added on the car. So there's adding the reflection onto the window. Again, underneath here, bottom of the kind of diffuser area, added another crisp reflection. So assuming that there's going to be reflections from the underside of the car. And then this diffuser area giving a lot of depth and matching those reflections into the bodywork as well, so it's not just flat grey, and not giving it complete shine, almost like a satin effect, just with a bit of a hard brush. See, there's the additional mesh texture at the back there. Another reflection on this panel here, assuming that that's going to be reflecting off the floor, and then finishing off with all the soft highlight yellow layers underneath, and then one crisp white reflection. Another downward facing panel, again more reflections. And also this one's more reflecting to the side, so another downward facing panel, but looking like it's reflecting over kind of that area over there. So you can really see the car's starting to look more and more shiny. Might be a bit overkill, but it helps create a bit of visual drama. And then with this behind the wheel, this big kind of flowing wheel arch, I actually added more shadow, just to say that the lights on the floor actually created a shadow at top there, so you can see the difference before and after, and that also gives the car more depth and a bit more of a muscular look. And around the brake light as well, like what I did with the tail lights, I added just a bit of a soft glow, just using a soft brush and a lighter red shade, and then just added a little highlight there just to finish off this little brake light area. Also through pen tool and vector mask. So this little side skirt kind of panel, the top part of it I made it look like it was reflecting off the floor, and the bottom part I made it look like it was reflecting off the kind of original light source, the overhead light source. So it's a lot of guesswork, a lot of just doing it by eye. It's not super accurate, and it's not the textbook method as to how to do it. Same with this little kind of brake, I think it's a brake cooling vent, reflecting off the floor and the top. And then there's a little strip around the wheel itself, adding more lighting and shading to that. So with both the fronts and backs, it's not. It also really helps accentuate the wheel areas and finish off, so it's not just one sharp ending around the wheel, it really finishes off the wheel arches. And then even the wheels that are imported or just copied off an existing car, added some more lighting and shading, and just made it look like it's reflecting off this new light source off the floor, and actually matches the car environment as well. And then when I get to the end of my render, what I actually do is I take the pen tool, find the path that I want to do. So let's just click on a layer, and then across that path I'll say stroke path and stimulate pressure, and you get these really sharp lines, but not even weight, so it looks like there's a highlight across that line. So I'm going to use that simple process of just stroke path, stimulate pressure, and create all this, just really finish off all the little edges of the car that make it look a bit more realistic. So there's a ton of layers here, it's just that stroke path layer. So these, using the door panel, the split lines, that's not stroking, or not stroke pressure. But then after that, all the highlights on top of that that's all stroke pressure. Oh, sorry, stimulate pressure, sorry. You see all these little highlights around the doors and stuff. And it's very subtle. But once you do all over the car, it really helps give it that final touch. So especially here, if you look around the tail light, that black looked quite flat. So adding highlights all around that tail light really makes it look a bit sharp and really makes it stand out a bit more. These highlights are actually for the diffuser. I'll come back to that. So just going all around the car and all the edges that you think would pick up highlights. Stroke path, stimulate pressure. Let's add that diffuser and finish off the environment as well. The diffuser is just 3 little grey panels underneath the exhaust. And the environment actually added a bit of a texture at the bottom, so it looks like tire marks, and then just I think I did a gradient overlay just to make sure it's pure black and white, and then click multiply so that type texture goes straight onto this background that I've created. And then I also did a bit of speckle onto the gravel just to make it look like the brake lights were actually reflecting onto the floor texture as well. And then around all the light sources I found like a speckle PNG texture, and I just color overlaid what speckle I wanted. And so you find these little like little bits of texture all around, or splatter, yeah. And it looks like floating particles and dust in the environment. It just gives it a little bit more depth. So just something I was messing around with and just trying to elevate the render to the next level. There's a couple layers that I hadn't selected. I'm just making sure that everything has been selected, but it's the overall essence of the car. The car is basically there, it's basically done. And then right at the end, I take a soft brush. So this was actually for the brake lights, so like a red glow over the brake lights, and even reflected the brake lights onto this little panel here, onto that panel there, just to give the car a bit more, will give the render a bit more drama. And then this was just a soft brush with all these little highlights. So if you look on the window area, you see these, taking a small soft brush and just going over all those hard edges and making it look like there's additional highlights. And then from there, it's little bits of branding, just putting a bit of fun, putting my own logo in. Take those two away. And then I save the final image as like a flat image, and just do a bit of levels and contrast. But that's basically it.